You know, sometimes you leave home for a while hoping that when you return, everything will be exactly as you left it. Quiet, familiar, comforting. But for Jake Morrison, coming back wasn't the relief he'd been praying for. It was the day his nightmare began. Jake returned to his family's Texas ranch after 4 brutal months in Houston, living inside the antiseptic hell of a hospital room where machines beeped and the air smelled of bleach. He had been there, day in and day out, holding his father's hand as the man who taught him how to read the sky and feel the land slowly lost his battle with cancer. After his father passed, Jake had one promise left to keep, to protect the land his family had fought for across 4 generations. Land his grandfather had bought after the war with the sweat of oilfield wages. Land where his father taught him which way the winds blew before a storm. All Jake wanted was to step back onto Morrison land, to feel the real Texas dirt under his boots, to take a deep breath of dry, dusty wind and remember why it was worth fighting for. But that morning, as his truck rolled down the familiar dirt road toward home, Jake didn't see the old white farmhouse his grandfather had built by hand. Instead, he saw 110 brand new houses lined up in perfect rows, with neatly trimmed lawns, paved streets, mailboxes painted white, and sidewalks so clean they looked fake. Jake slammed on the brakes, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Kids were riding bikes where he used to run barefoot as a child. Strangers were walking dogs on the land his family had bled to protect from banks and droughts. Stepping out of his truck, Jake stood on the road, staring at the surreal scene of suburban perfection on what used to be his family's back pasture. Before he could process what he was seeing, a woman in an expensive suit walked toward him, high heels tapping against the new pavement, blonde hair flawless, eyes sharp and cold. Karen, she smiled, that practiced, icy smile, and held out a piece of paper. Mr. Morrison, you owe us $50,000 in infrastructure fees. Jake took the paper with shaking hands. Listed on it were development fees, geological survey fees, community improvement charges, and a declaration that, because Jake had abandoned the land for 4 months, Karen and her community development project had taken the liberty to improve it on his behalf. She met Jake's gaze, her voice soft but slicing. We've been waiting for you to return from Houston. I trust your father's funeral went smoothly. The words cut deeper than any blade. How did she know about his father's cancer? How did she know he had been in Houston for months? How did this stranger know anything about his family's suffering? Around him, people continued to walk, smiling, waving to each other, completely unaware that they were living on stolen land, land that had a name, Morrison, and it wasn't for sale. At that moment, Jake Morrison realized something undeniable. Karen wasn't just taking his land. She was hiding something much bigger beneath those houses. And Jake silently promised himself that no matter the cost, he would uncover the truth. The Texas night was quiet, but Jake Morrison's mind was loud. He sat alone in his old farmhouse kitchen, a cup of coffee long gone cold, staring at the invoice Karen had handed him with her ice-cold smile. Each line item read like a slap in the face: $7,500 for a geological survey, $12 for foundation testing, countless other community improvement fees stacking up like a mountain he never agreed to climb. But it wasn't the outrageous fees that kept Jake awake. It was the signature at the bottom of the geological survey, Dr. Harrison, a respected geologist whose name was known across Texas. The ink on the signature was still fresh, the pen strokes too perfect, too neat. Jake's gut told him something was wrong. He picked up his phone, hands trembling, and dialed the number printed on the letterhead. Harrison Geological Services, Sarah speaking. How may I help you today? Jake swallowed hard. I'm calling to verify a geological survey, doctor. Harrison supposedly signed 2 months ago for my property. There was a pause, a sharp intake of breath on the other end. I'm very sorry, sir, Sarah finally said, her voice lowering, but Dr. Harrison passed away 6 months ago. A sudden heart attack, right here in the office. The world seemed to tilt. 6 months ago. The survey was dated only 2 months ago. That signature wasn't just suspicious, it was impossible. Jake hung up, sweat prickling along his spine. The documents Karen had used to justify seizing his land and burying it in fees were built on a lie. A dead man's forged signature was their foundation. The next morning, Jake drove 40 minutes to meet Alina Rodriguez, a sharp, relentless attorney in her early 30s, known for taking on oil companies and winning. Her dark, intelligent eyes scanned the documents with the precision of a hawk as she flipped through the pages, pulling out a professional magnifying glass. Jake, Alina said, adjusting her glasses, this signature is a trace job. Whoever forged it paused and restarted. You can see the hesitation marks. a real signature flows, but this is a copycat's work. But that was just the surface. Elena flipped over to the drilling map attached to the survey. Red dots marked where foundation testing had supposedly occurred, forming a perfect grid pattern across the lowest, most flood-prone parts of Morrison land. She looked up, her expression grave. "Jake, no one drills 200 feet down for residential foundations. They drill that deep when they're looking for oil." A chill went through Jake. This wasn't about 110 houses or even about property lines. Karen hadn't just built a neighborhood on his land. She'd created a front to disguise illegal oil extraction, using fake documents to cover her tracks. Jake clenched his fists, staring out the window at the dusty Texas road leading back to the ranch his family had protected for 4 generations. This was no longer about a rancher fighting for his land. It was about justice versus greed, about honoring the sacrifices of those who came before him, about stopping a woman who thought she could erase his family's legacy with fake papers and corporate smiles. Jake turned to Elena, determination replacing fear. If they want to fight, they're about to learn Morrison land doesn't go down easy. The Texas morning was already scorching, but Jake Morrison felt a cold shiver crawl down his spine as he drove back across the family ranch, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. In the passenger seat, Elena Rodriguez flipped through the thick stack of documents with the cold precision of an attorney who had faced down oil giants before. She tapped her pen against the file. "Jake, if we're right, Karen didn't just forge Dr. Harrison's signature. She used this fake geological survey to justify drilling 200 feet into your land. And the drill patterns match oil exploration, not foundation testing." Jake glanced out the window, past the fence lines where his father had taught him to read the clouds, measure the winds, and listen to the land to know when to plant grass for the cattle. All of it was now under threat by someone else's greed. Karen thinks she's clever, but she doesn't understand this land. The land doesn't lie, Elena. Elena nodded, opening her laptop and pulling up the high-resolution images of the drilling report. Red dots aligned in a perfect grid across Jake's fields, the unmistakable blueprint of oil exploration. If she's really pulling oil from underneath this land, there will be pipelines, hidden pump stations, or some evidence underground. Jake clenched his fists. "We need proof. We need photos, samples, and footage before she can bury it all." Elena checked her watch, her eyes sharpening. There's a storm brewing offshore. The news says it will hit in 72 hours. If Karen plans to use the hurricane to cover her tracks, we only have 3 days. The plan. Elena prepared emergency filings for the FBI, the Environmental Protection Agency EPA, and the Texas Attorney General's office, attaching every piece of evidence: the forged signature of Dr. Harrison, the suspicious drilling map, the outrageous invoices Karen sent Jake, recorded statements from geological staff confirming Dr. Harrison's death before the document date. Jake contacted local investigative journalists known for exposing corruption and oil scandals, inviting them to the ranch the next morning. They rented a ground-penetrating radar, hired a soil core driller, and readied cameras and drones to document every inch of the operation. They decided to launch at dawn before Karen could react, and before her private security team could prepare. That evening, Jake sat on the porch, watching moonlight glint across the vast fields. He could almost hear his father's voice in the breeze. "Jake, Morrison land isn't for sale, not for stealing, not for them to take and leave. You were born to protect it." Alana stepped outside, handing him a cup of coffee, her eyes steady. "Tomorrow, we aren't just protecting land. We're going to expose Karen to all of Texas." Jake tightened his grip around the cup, lifting his eyes to the scattering of stars. "Tomorrow, we take back the honor of Morrison land." The morning sun cast a pale gold light over the fields Jake had known since he was a boy, back when his father would point at cloud formations to teach him how to predict the rain. Today, that same land was about to witness a war. Elena pulled up in her SUV, stepping out with a backpack full of documents, her laptop, and the composed face of an attorney who had taken down oil companies twice her size. Behind her, a pickup truck arrived, carrying a small technical team armed with seismic scanners, drones, and soil testing equipment. "We need to move fast before Karen catches wind of this," Elena said, her voice calm but urgent. Jake nodded, eyes sharp, pointing to the section of the field burned into his memory from Karen's hidden drilling maps. "We start there. If they drilled for oil, we're going to find it." The seismic scanner hummed as it swept back and forth across the field, while the drone lifted into the sky, capturing aerial footage of the entire area. The team began extracting soil cores from targeted spots, installing water sampling tubes to detect oil residue or chemical contamination below the surface. As the sun climbed higher, the drone transmitted images of hidden structures disguised as sheds or water tanks, actually concealed oil pumps linked by underground pipelines stretching toward the back of Karen's model homes. Elena opened her laptop, cross-referencing the captured locations with Karen's drilling plans, her face tightening with each match confirmed. "This isn't soil testing for housing, Jake," Elena said, her voice cold. "It's an oil extraction blueprint. She's been stealing oil from right under your feet." Jake clenched his fists, staring at the neatly trimmed lawns and freshly painted homes in Karen's fake suburb. Children played on the grass, families worked in their yards. Completely unaware that beneath them, Karen was draining their land for profit. Elena turned to Jake, her eyes fierce. "We have the evidence, but Karen won't go down quietly. She'll try to silence you or wipe the evidence before the storm hits." In the distance, the wind began to pick up, dark clouds forming on the horizon. The radio was already talking about the incoming hurricane, its voice crackling with warnings. Jake looked toward the gathering storm, his voice low. "She thinks the storm will cover her tracks, but it might be the very thing that exposes her." Elena closed her laptop, her determination clear. "We need to get this out now. Media, the FBI, the EPA, everyone." Jake nodded, heading back to the cabin where he kept the old family documents. Placing his hand on the weathered wooden chest, he took a deep breath. "Dad, I'm going to protect this land." Outside, the wind began to carry the salty scent of the approaching hurricane. But to Jake, it wasn't a threat. It was an opportunity to reveal everything Karen had tried to hide. That day, Jake sent out every piece of evidence: drone footage, soil samples, hidden pipeline maps, and the seismic data to media outlets, the FBI and environmental regulators, attaching a single message: justice needs to arrive before the storm does. As the late afternoon light fell through the cabin windows, Jake knew the fight for Morrison land had begun, and this time, he wasn't fighting alone. That afternoon, the winds began to howl across the fields where Jake had grown up, carrying the salty scent of the Gulf and the damp heaviness that signaled a storm was coming. On the radio, the broadcaster's voice repeated warnings about Hurricane Patricia, now a Category 4, projected to make landfall that very night, right in their area. Jake sat inside the old wooden cabin, the glow of sunset casting long shadows across maps scattered over the table, surrounded by folders, drone photos, soil samples, and all the evidence of the illegal oil extraction Karen had hidden beneath the facade of her model housing development. Elena stepped in, holding a phone on speaker, connected to the FBI agent in San Antonio. "They've received our files, Jake," Elena said, her voice tight. "But they need more time to launch a formal investigation." Jake looked out the window and saw trucks hauling equipment out of Karen's development in the fading light, moving as if racing against the clock. He knew Karen was clearing the last traces of her operation, preparing for the storm to wash everything away. But Jake also realized this storm might be their only chance to expose the truth. "Elena, if we don't stop them now, everything will disappear under the flood by tomorrow," Jake said, a resolute glint in his eyes. Elena nodded. "I've sent the footage to 3 local news stations. They promised to send crews to record everything before the storm hits." They both rushed out to the truck, driving toward Sunset Valley, the site where Karen had built 110 homes on Jake's family land. The strong winds rattled the for sale signs, flags snapped off their poles, and emergency sirens wailed across town. Families in the neighborhood were still preparing to evacuate, clueless that they were living above illegal oil wells drilled right under their homes. Children were still laughing, riding bikes in driveways, unaware that in a few hours, this entire place would be underwater. Elena raised her camera, capturing footage of exposed pump jacks revealed by previous rains, underground pipelines peeking through eroded soil where manicured lawns once covered them. "We need to document everything, Jake. This is the proof no one can ignore," Elena said, her voice shaking from the wind, but her eyes unwavering. Amidst swirling dust and debris, Jake stood in the street where he once herded cattle during storm seasons, looking at the homes built on his family's land, whispering to himself, "The storm will come, and it will take away what doesn't belong here." This time, the truth will not be buried. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Jake and Elena retreated to the cabin, where they set up a livestream system, ready to broadcast to the community and the press ensuring that everyone would witness what Karen had done. Hurricane Patricia would not just be nature's fury, it would become the awakening this town desperately needed, exposing the crimes Karen had tried to bury for so long. In the rhythm of rain pounding on the tin roof, Jake took a deep breath, eyes locked on the camera, preparing for the most important battle of his life. Hurricane Patricia struck at exactly 11 p.m. on schedule, tearing through the Texas night with winds that screamed like a freight train and rain that hammered against the windows of Jake and Alina's cabin, where they took shelter. From their window, they watched as Sunset Valley's pristine streets transformed into rivers of mud, swallowing cars, trash cans, and shards of rooftops ripped away by the wind. Streetlights snapped like twigs, lightning crackled across the sky, momentarily illuminating the devastation Karen had built on stolen land. Jake didn't sleep that night. He sat by the emergency radio, listening to urgent evacuation warnings and flood level updates, while his eyes never left the laptop screen, where a live camera feed showed house after house swept away, revealing the hidden network of drilling rigs and oil pumps Karen had buried under lawns and sidewalks. When dawn broke, the rain stopped, leaving a battlefield of debris and murky water behind. But in that chaos, the truth Karen had spent a year hiding finally surfaced. Old rigs lay exposed, rusting under the pale morning light, tangled among the remains of homes and fences. Pipes that had been disguised beneath shrubs and fences were now sprawled openly, revealing the lifelines of a hidden oil operation. Elena said nothing, focusing her camera lens, capturing every angle, every pipe, every exposed rig. "These images will end her," she whispered. Jake stepped carefully through the mud, stopping in front of a broken rig, watching oil swirling on the surface of floodwater. He bent down, picking up a torn sign that read, "Sunset Valley Community, a Karen Development." He squeezed the sign in his hand, remembering his grandfather's words, "This land belongs to those who respect it, not those who exploit it." Around them, rescue crews navigated through wreckage to save trapped families. But Jake's phone started buzzing, texts, calls, notifications from neighbors and strangers alike as the livestream footage spread across Facebook groups and local news feeds. "Jake, is this real? Karen did this to us. We've been living on an illegal oil field without even knowing." That morning, as smoke from fallen transformers curled above the flooded fields and rescue helicopters circled the gray skies, Jake realized one truth Karen had lost. The storm she thought would erase her crimes had, instead, exposed them for everyone to see. The community, once quiet and obedient, was waking up. For the first time in months, Jake allowed himself a small, steady smile as he watched neighbors who had once trusted Karen, now gathering to help each other, to pull people from the wreckage, to rebuild, and to demand answers. Today, they were no longer pawns in Karen's game. Today, they were a community ready to fight back. As the storm waters receded, leaving Sunset Valley in ruins, the community finally saw the truth. Oil pumps lay exposed among the debris, broken pipelines snaked through muddy streets, and the undeniable evidence of Karen's illegal oil extraction scheme, hidden beneath the facade of a neighborhood, was now in plain sight. Jake and Elena stood in the middle of the devastation, mud caked on their boots as Elena's camera clicked relentlessly, capturing every angle, every oil slick on the floodwaters. Proof. And justice for Morrison Land and the families who lost everything because they believed Karen's promises. Above them, rescue helicopters circled, broadcasting warnings for returning residents to be cautious in the flood zones. Amidst the chaos, Jake's phone buzzed with a single message: "Turn on the local news." On the screen, Karen, who once walked confidently into every HOA meeting, now appeared in handcuffs, her face pale and hair disheveled as Mexican authorities escorted her through the Cancun airport, caught while trying to flee to a non-extradition country. "Karen's been arrested," Elena said, her voice low but carrying a weight of relief. The community no longer bought her excuses. Families who had lost their homes demanded accountability. Reporters broadcasted her schemes to every household, and the truth about Karen's ambition and manipulation came to light. But her greed led to her final mistake, selling toxic wastewater as crude oil to buyers who didn't tolerate deceit. She now faced charges for fraud, environmental crimes, and conspiracy, while the partners she once relied on turned into enemies demanding repayment in ways she could never have predicted. Jake stood on his family's land, looking over what used to be Sunset Valley, now just empty foundations, broken power lines, and muddy roads. Yet, grass was starting to grow again, birds were returning, and the laughter of children echoed as families began cleaning up and supporting each other to rebuild. He rested his hand on the newly restored wooden sign, Morrison Family Land, engraved with his grandfather's words. This land belongs to those who respect it. That day, Jake was no longer a man forced into a fight he didn't ask for. He became the guardian of justice for his community, the one who stood up to reveal the truth no matter how powerful the opponent or how severe the threats. Karen lost everything, and Sunset Valley finally woke up. After everything, the sky over Willowbrook was impossibly clear. The lake mirrored the morning sun as if no hurricane had ever swept through, and the scent of damp earth rose softly whenever the breeze rolled across the recovering fields where Sunset Valley once stood, a graveyard of concrete and greed now reclaimed by nature. Jake stood in front of the wooden sign that read, Morrison Family Land, on the very spot where his grandfather had once taught his father to read the clouds and the winds, to sense rain in the shifting scent of the soil. Now, Jake realized he was continuing that legacy, not with a shovel or a fishing rod, but with resolve, courage, and the willingness to stand up when everyone else stayed silent. Elena stopped by the cabin, bringing him a hot coffee, a quiet smile playing on her lips, her eyes glinting as she glanced over the rippling water beneath the morning sun. The documents and photos she had gathered had become the evidence that helped the FBI and state authorities bring Karen and her conspirators to justice. Karen, once seated behind her polished desk with that cold, calculating smile, now faced years behind bars, left to reckon with the weight of her choices and the truth she could no longer hide. Jake walked along the lakeshore, where children ran barefoot through sprouting reeds, their laughter ringing out, a living testament that greed and deceit might seize the land for a time, but they could never steal the spirit of a place protected by generations of love and courage. In that moment, Jake understood that defending justice was not a single battle, but a lifelong journey, and that anyone, quiet or bold, could become part of that journey, so long as they chose to stand when it mattered. As the sun set over Willowbrook Lake, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Jake smiled softly, whispering to the breeze, "Grandpa, I kept it safe." Because the truth can be hidden, but nature and justice always find a way to reclaim what belongs to them. If this story reminded you that no matter how quiet you stay, justice will eventually speak, hit the like button to help these true stories reach more people who need to hear them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video about ordinary people taking a stand against greed, protecting their communities, and fighting for what's right. Have you witnessed corruption or injustice in your own neighborhood? Share your story in the comments below. You never know. Your story might give someone else the courage they need to protect their home and stand up for what's right. We read every single comment, and who knows? Your story could be featured in one of our next videos to inspire others and hold the powerful accountable. Thank you for staying with us. Together we can make sure the truth keeps moving, no matter how hard they try to bury it.